All right, welcome to another episode of Getting Started.Life on the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network. This week's show is brought to you by Keystone Mediation and Red Leg Funding. And I love it. I was going to say a good show, but that would be a terrible pun. And actually, it's a great show today because I don't know how many times, like, I've been told, hey, you got a good voice. And other people have as well that I've ever talked to. And it's like voiceover work, right? Like, how hard can that be? You can make a bunch of money at it. And I was lucky to meet Lauren Goode at a networking event, and that's what she does for a living. So I love it. And I really like this show, especially because while I am never afraid to venture into a new endeavor, I had a conversation with her and I was like, you know what? Right now, I don't have the time or resources. It would run me thin and I wouldn't be successful at it. So I love the fact that, it's kind of what the show's about, right? It's like figuring out, well, maybe it's the right thing or not. So, Lauren, thank you so much for joining us. And let's talk about your background, because I think, that was a really interesting thing for me when we talked a while ago, like how you got into voiceover work.
Like some of the most powerful things in life, voiceover found me. I kind of stumbled into it. So when I went to college, I studied theater. Actually, I studied theater and philosophy and religion. So I have like the most worthless degree, piece of paper that cost many, many thousands of dollars. But after I graduated, I was doing a show in Plano with a gal by the name of Colleen Klinkenbeard. It's an easy to remember name. And she was directing cartoons at Funimation Studios. And she said, hey, you know what? I kind of am digging your friend. And so if you'll hook me up, on a date with your friend, I'll get you an audition to do some voiceover on cartoons. And I thought that sounded like an excellent deal. So I showed up and I auditioned for a cartoon called Kitty Grade. And somehow I lucked or manipulated or frauded my way into making them believe that I was a voiceover actor, and the rest is history.
So you were doing other type of acting prior to that. What were you doing at that time to be able to transfer those skills?
So when I went to college, I studied performing arts on the stage. I'm not much of a musical theater actor, but I was doing comedies and drama and things of that nature. So things like cold reading, script analysis, building characters, I had, but what I didn't understand was the difference between what it's like to perform on a stage where you're performing to people who are very far away, and the difference between the intimacy of what the microphone likes or doesn't like in terms of performance. Quick example, in theater, there are shows that can be very presentational. I'm going to show you, I'm going to do something big and wacky, and I'm going to talk to a whole group of people. You do that to this microphone, and it totally rejects you. This microphone's much more like a telephone. It wants to be talked to one to one. And those were things I didn't know going in, and I learned the hard way through a lot of trial and error over the next decade of my life.
So how long have you been doing this for?
I started in 2003.
Okay. Wow. And what primarily, like, when we spoke, voiceovers, like, there's a lot of different kinds. And when we were talking before the show started, what are some of the different kinds of voiceover that you focus on?
Well, so when I started doing cartoons, anime. Full Metal Alchemist was the big cartoon that I did. I played Gracia Hughes, and I knew I didn't want to stay in Dallas, which is where Funimation's located. I knew I wanted to come to Chicago, so I did some research about like, well, if I wanted to keep doing voiceover, what's the industry like in Chicago? Well, at the time, Chicago did not have any animation. They didn't have any video games. It was much more commercial and what we used to call industrial. So like, here's your HEPA fan, and this is how you insert the screen and change stuff out. So I learned before I moved up here that I was going to have to kind of switch over to doing more commercial work. So I went and got what's called a commercial voiceover demo. But because I had only ever done cartoons and did not have experience in doing commercials, my very first commercial demo sounds like they hired cartoon characters to sell you
Which could be
baking
really cool.
products, automobiles, furniture. It's great. But I like to mention that story just because it doesn't necessarily matter if you start in the perfect or right way. What really matters is how much you want to do it. because I took that first really awful demo, came to Chicago, got an agent, not because of the awful demo, but because I had a cartoon that had been on Cartoon Network. And then I figured out how to do commercials. So that was really the big shift for me, as I went from doing very character-based things that I was familiar with, dialect work, all that, interactive scenes and dialogue, to having to learn about commercials and industrials. And I'll tell you, that's the bread and butter of what I do now. I do commercials, I do brand videos, I do what are called explainer videos. If anybody's ever watched YouTube and let's introduce this new product or feature, like those are the kinds of things I do. E-learning, so compliance training, things of that nature. And I'll tell you, it's weird, it's counterintuitive. I actually almost enjoy this type of voiceover more than the cartoons, because you get to learn so much about so many different things that you never would.
Yeah, you're like Ginger on Gilligan's Island. Somehow she knew how to do like everything based on every movie she was in.
Exactly.
So, it found you, but it sounds like there is a process to get into it. So I want to jump right in, because I know we're going to have a ton of questions as we go through. What would be that first step, right? If somebody's like, wow, either someone has said it'd be a good way to go. A lot of the listeners may be people going through getting split up or divorced. And it seems like a job that, while not easy, is flexible from a schedule perspective. So what would be the first step if somebody was like, okay, I'm going to try this out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, like in everything in life, voiceover is very similar to most things. And I think it was Tony Robbins who said, if you want to accomplish something new, it's 80% psychology and 20% mechanics. And I'm guessing what you're asking me is on the mechanics. What's the first thing that must be done?
Yeah, but before you go on though, I would love the psychology sprinkled in, because in other shows, I think that the psychology is as important, because as you were talking about, there's bumps, right? And there's going to be failures. And if it's anything like real acting, granted, I've never done any of that aside from high school, but there's rejection and there's a lot of things. So I would love for you to marry that up a little bit and provide both, because I think you've got the great, wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, well, there's a great quote in the book Audition that talks about, anyone who's going to go into acting, and I think this is true for any type of acting, you have to be incredibly stubborn or incredibly crazy, or a combination of both. Because not very many people are wired to take the amount of rejection and, in some ways, isolation that come from acting, right? You show up and you're like, here I am the product, I am the service, and you get way more no's than you ever get yeses. You get way more no's than maybes. And usually you don't hear anything back at all. So it is, I think the psychology end of this is really the important thing. I have people message me all the time and ask me about voiceover. And the first question I always ask them is, why do you want to get into this? Because I'll tell you, I've seen thousands of people at this point, try to get into this industry, and many make it. And the ones who don't all have something in common. I think it'll be easier than my crappy day job right now. I think I'll be able to make money quickly. Or it almost comes from an ego place of like, I'm going to prove that my voice is great. And any of those as a why, if it doesn't change, is not enough to get you through what becomes a lifelong journey of learning and course correction.
Well, and something you just said was you've spoken to thousands of people, right? So when I was talking to you a little bit, I went online and there's like oodles of Facebook groups, and it's like, holy dog shit. Like, there are literally a ton of people doing this. And I know later on we'll talk a little bit about finding ways in, and kind of, if you want to be successful, I think when I was talking to you, it was like no barrier to entry, right? I have a voice and I got a microphone. There we go. And then it's like, well, yes, sort of, but there's huge barriers to entry in terms of making it a viable side hustle even.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, the industry's changed so much when I started in 2003 or when I got an agent in 2005 to what it is now. I mean, industry trends back then, everyone wanted this announcer voice, like, the voice of authority, the movie trailer, style voice. Like, everything kind of had if you were a female announcer, you had there was a client who once described it. It was sexy enough for men. friendly enough for women. That used to
Wow.
be the female announcer voice. And so everything had authority. And now the trend is completely the opposite. We want authenticity. We want real people. I don't want an announcer to tell me to go to, XYZ bank and open a checking account. I want my best friend or my mom or my sister or my girlfriend to tell me instead. So
So
it takes I think a lot more acting chops now than it once did. You used to be able to be like, I have a great voice and can read with authority, and now it's like, I'm a vulnerable human with an authentic imagination.
well, and I think from the trend perspective, like you can tell now, a lot of celebrities are in it, and you're like, oh, there's like Sam Elliott, right? And there's
Yeah.
like James Earl Jones, and I know those voices, and they're like voices that make you, it's like comfort voice, right? You're like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
gonna buy that car because that dude's telling me to buy the car, and I like him, you
Yeah, I'm
know.
gonna get the Tom Hiddleston car. Yeah, totally.
Right. So, is the first step figuring out why, or is it like figuring out whether you have what it takes to jump in?
I think it's understanding why you're attracted to it, really, I think is a better way to put it. If you're attracted to it for, the acting perspective or to see what you're capable of, to learn a new skill, some of my favorite folks to coach are people who at retirement age decide that they finally want to take this chapter of their life and really like, I'm going to follow my dreams. I'm going to see what I'm capable of. That is a glorious mindset. Other people come in for very like everyday reasons, like they, read to their children in funny voices. They enjoy cartoons or have always been told they have a great voice or are very animated in their voice. That's one I used to get all the time. I'm so glad you got into cartoons, Lauren. I don't know anybody else who talks in as many voices as you do. But it's knowing why. And then the next piece, of course, is trying it out, like getting a coaching session or taking a class and seeing if the reality is anything like the expectation you had. And then the first real mechanical piece that is necessary if you want to actually do voiceover versus learn or coach voiceover is to get that demo. That demo is the calling card. It's your headshot. It's the ticket to gain entry anywhere. You have to have demo portfolio samples.
So the why obviously first step, and now like the all the other stuff, giving it a try, and it seems like that's the first point where you're digging in your wallet or your checkbook.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
with the giving it a try, what should people expect for an initial investment? I would guess.
It all depends. Like, individual coaching sessions run, anywhere from $75 up to $200, depending on who you book it with. A weekend class could be like $300. I mean, for coaching, there's also, I think, if you belong to certain Facebook groups on the internet, sometimes they'll have like monthly workouts where you can come, and those are usually very affordable. I think some coaches offer them for like $25. So in terms of just dipping your toe in the water, that is very, very flexible financially. But once you get into the demo, I mean, $500 minimum up to $6, $7, $8, $9,000, and then there's the equipment. So I think it's really important when you dip your toe into the water, you find out, does this match my expectations? If this is harder than I thought it was going to be, does that excite me and motivate me and turn me on? Or am I like, man, I just really was looking to make money in my pajamas? Because you do. The second piece is you have to be willing to be coached, to be trained, and to kind of continually. It's not like a one and done thing. It's like making bed. You're going to have to keep every time you move forward. You're going to have to do more training. So those are the first three.
So with that, with the coaching, right? Is that they're going to jump into it, right? They're going to try. Like, how will they know if they're good for it? I mean, I remember when my daughter was young, and you got all these, solicitations for like, wow, she's gorgeous, she's going to be a model, right? And that went to everybody. And it seems like if you didn't do this the right way, you could write a lot of checks and not find out what you need to do. So, like, what's the best way to move from that, hey, I'm going to go to a couple classes and see what it's about, to, hey, I really want to see if I have a shot?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there are certain most beginner level voiceover classes, they don't put a voice evaluation as a requirement because they do. They want you to be able to come in and try it out and have fun. For any advanced level coaching or classes that are offered from most reputable schools or training programs, a voice evaluation would be necessary. And they're checking to make sure, like, is your voice marketable? Like, is there something marketable about your voice? Is your voice clear enough? Do you have enough supported breath to get through a sentence without running out of air and sound natural? Stuff like that. But the good news, I think, in today's world is that because the trend is they're very much looking for real, everyday people, like the diversity in voices is higher now than it's ever been in my experience of being in this industry. And two, I think a lot of times we think about voiceovers only like, Super Bowl commercials and those big commercials we see on cable TV or the radio. But now you think about, like, everyone needs content, and all businesses kind of have to compete with having videos, with having all kinds of multimedia content that goes on the web. People have taken their, blogs that they've been writing on their website for forever and creating, audio and or video content to go with them. So there's so much content now that, your voice evaluation isn't to make sure you can sound like the golden toned or sexy announcer. It's, can you speak authentically? Like, are you capable of being a character in a voiceover story?
So as part of coaching, do you help guide people to, like, hey, you're probably better suited for this, and it might, I'm not going to say contradict, but it might not align with the why. So someone would be like, I totally want to be the dude in the video games with the gun and the first person shooter. And someone's like, no, you're going to be telling people how to take apart a sewing machine.
For now, right?
Right.
In this chapter, no, the way I like to explain it is, and this is true in anything. We have strengths that are natural to us, right? That we can keep growing. We do have things outside the comfort zone or outside our wheelhouse that we can strengthen. What I tell people when they come in and they have no voiceover experience and they want to get into video games or animation, I'm how patient are you? Because that's going to be the hardest on. Like, that's going to take the most hoops you're going to have to jump through, the most coaching you're going to have to do. It's going to be the most difficult demo you can produce. Like, so how patient are you? Would you be willing to kind of warm up those chops on doing other types of voiceover? Because to get into narration and commercial voiceover it's great practice. If you can't do commercial narration, I'm going to say you probably won't ever reach the stage where you'll be doing anything other than being extra background voices on animation or video, because it's so much more specific when you add dialogue and characters and, like, action that's happening. So I think it's great for people to start with something simple and gain confidence and grow skills that way and then go into it. But no, I'm never like, well, you got a long road ahead of you.
Right. So you mentioned equipment. Where is that, like, another step, or is that when you're kind of nailing down what you're trying to do? Because it seems chicken and egg, right? Like, a good voice recorded on somewhat crappy, or just entry level even, like, when should people be looking at equipment?
The type of equipment you get really depends on what you're up to. So, like, for example, you can start coaching and doing homework on things that are not voiceover level microphones. If you have the ability to record something and edit it and upload it, that's all you need for the coaching stage. I like to look at it this way. Like, the trifecta kind of goes, you're coming from the right mindset. You got to work on you first. Then the next piece is performance. Then after performance comes your pristine, clean audio and tech. Then the final piece is marketing and the business.
Well, and I want to get to those.
No, but that's how I coach. Like, we're going to work on you first, your why. Then we're going to work on performance. Then we're going to talk about equipment. So that's where it falls, I would say.
Should like an athlete, right? If you look at a professional athlete, like we use basketball player. My kid loves basketball right now, right? And when they're not in the season, they have a strength coach, a nutrition coach, a shooting coach. Should people expect that they're going to need you as a coach, but also a voiceover coach? And then, I mean, I would dare to say that there's probably lifestyle changes people might have to make, because now if their voice is what they want to use to make a living, there's upkeep of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the more healthy you are, like the better your instrument functions. But in terms of people who are just looking at starting a voiceover career, you're going to need to have a technique coach. The only time you really need multiple technique coaches in the beginning is if you are going to try to do two tracks at once. So I'm going to learn commercial narration and I want to start learning animation and characters. There are some coaches who will do, everything, but for the most part, it's pretty niche specific. But no, you don't have to hire a whole team of people right out of the gate.
And when you're trying to figure all of this out, how do you get a script to do a demo? As an example, do you go online and try and get a transcript of something, or as a coach, do you help people get scripts that will help them?
Well, I coach, and we can talk later about specifically what I coach. But demo production is something different than what I do. I help prepare people if they are going to make a demo, but I'm not the actual demo producer. Most reputable demo producers will either um, specifically write copy for the voice actor or will be responsible for finding it. There are online scripts that people use, and unfortunately, there's probably at this point thousands of demos that have the exact same, because they're alphabetical, like A through C on that list. There are other creative ways, if you listen to, if you don't do the paid subscription to any type of streaming and you actually watch commercials, you can start to transcribe copy there. You can pull up websites of brands and services you love and look at what their kind of written mission statements and things are, and use those as copy, especially for practice. But for your demo, I think having that specifically customized script for you is pretty important. And that's part of hopefully what you're paying for.
When people are trying to figure all this out, it seems like there would be, because sort of back to what we're talking about with like celebrities, right? Like there seems like no way to do this without emulating somebody else. And how important is it to find your voice versus going, hey, I want to sound like whoever, name the celebrity.
Yeah, this is something that comes up in coaching all the time, and everyone who does it, even successfully, is guilty of doing it. There's the radio voice in your head, like you're hearing that celebrity or you're hearing that I know that a tag should sound like this, like you're kind of having to fight that. But a process that happens in learning voiceover and any new skill is kind of recalibrating what you're experiencing or think you're experiencing internally and what's actually like objectively observable outside. So like in my head, I think like, oh, I'm giving it my best, Judi Dench level queen energy. And then I hear it back and it's like, so and that's part of what a coach helps you do is they kind of reflect back objectively what they're hearing so you can start kind of tuning your ear. But when we're listening to spots, what we're listening for isn't, we definitely can go, oh, I really like the vulnerability of this actor and the sass of that one. And we can kind of like pick and choose things that we want to emulate. But we're really listening for kind of stylistically, what are things like? You hear like for a while during the pandemic, everyone had this tone of voice, right? And then it's like when we came out of it, that changed fast. And we got like crazy funny and humorful and playful. So those are the kinds of things you want to listen to and the types of voice versus like, I'm now going to mimic the commercial I heard on TV.
Right. Like the ASPCA ones. If I could ever get that voice, I could make anybody cry.
Yeah. If you're going to go that route, just collect characters. I'm going to be like there used to be a commercial for Upwork, and I don't know the voice actress's name who did it, but it's like, hey, The Rock, we heard you're running in 2020. So she's a character I keep in my mind now. And when someone asks me for a peppy, upbeat read on coffee that I'm like, okay, I'll channel her.
Got it. So we're going to go to a quick commercial break, and then we'll be back with Lauren for the rest of the steps and the mistake to avoid.
Yay!
And hopefully I won't forget to take myself off mute this time. All right, and we are back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to Getting Started.Life on the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network. And today, again, we have Lauren Goode with us to talk about getting into voiceover work. So just a recap of the beginning of the show. Oh, and as a reminder, today's show is brought to you by Keystone Mediation and Red Leg Funding. So in the beginning of the show, we talked about the steps. And I love that you're a coach because you kind of already had them. Like you were like, what are we going to talk about? I'm like, what you do for a living? Right. So it's why you're doing this. It's kind of getting out there and doing it. Right. And then it was sort of that equipment piece, right? And then moving into that next. So where would you find step 3, and then we can move into step 4?
Oh, let's see. So if mindset was step 1, performance was step 2, audio is step 3.
Okay, got it.
Then marketing and business. Like, so, you know, you're in it for the right reasons. You know what it's going to take for you to continue doing it. You've worked on your performance. You now have a vehicle to perform into, right? And you've started to hone how your audio sounds, so it doesn't sound like you're performing from like the best Meryl Streep level performance, but you're like at the bottom of a well and no one can hear you. So those steps take some time to master. Then the next piece is, well, you've got great audio, great performance, great mindset. What if nobody knows about you? Right? And that's the tricky part. So now we've got to start finding end users who need to use voiceover. And what's real fun about our industry is that there are some folks who know they need voiceover, like talent agents, casting directors, video production houses, folks who design e-learning courses, advertising agencies. Like, they're all very, very familiar with needing to constantly cast and hire voiceover actors. And then there's a whole group of people who don't know that voiceover could actually help their projects. And so we as voice actors start engaging with the public who may not be as familiar with hiring voice actors. We get to do both, which can be really, really exciting.
So how often is it like a surprise? You know, and this is kind of going back to the first steps, but I'm going to kind of go in a direction after that. But how often is it a surprise to people how they actually sound?
You know, I think most folks kind of go, I mean, everyone's different, but I would say a majority of folks I know kind of had a similar experience that I did. It's like you don't necessarily enjoy the sound of your own voice. You're like, I can't believe that that's me, or that they wanted that. But this is the thing, when you have to edit your own audio every day and you're auditioning and listening back to yourself as part of either your passion, your hobby, your new pursuit, or your career, you get over it. And you kind of learn how to compartmentalize. Like, there's no real attachment anymore. It's that voice that I need to edit versus, ooh, that's my voice.
Right. So there is a question that I want to address. One of the listeners was making sure, or had a question on whether we can, we'll have the contact information, and absolutely. But there was another question as part of that with what's a good place to meet people, right? Like, how can you connect with other people? We'll get to step kind of 4 and 5 a little more after that. But so if someone's getting started, you would mention classes and groups and coaching and all of that. Do you recommend getting hooked up with people on Facebook and other social media, or is it like a huge wasteland where you're going to waste time and potentially get distracted?
I'm very biased, so I'm going to try to answer this as directly and clearly as I can. I think in terms of connection, it's great to take group classes for that. If you're doing one-on-one coaching, then that's a great time to look out for other, groups for networking. The reason why I'm biased is I'm the director of a Facebook community that was specifically designed for newer actors. In my experience, I've been a member of a lot of different voiceover Facebook groups, and many of them are lovely, but they all kind of have sometimes an attitude that veteran pro members have been doing this for 20 years can sometimes be pretty intense and aggressive with newer people who come and ask the same question that 50,000 other people have asked over the last year. And I mean, I've seen some people really get piled on in those groups. So I wouldn't recommend that part of it for your very first experience of community. But yeah, if you're doing one-on-one coaching, finding a group, one of the big things that's really important in the beginning is having some sort of accountability. You have it built in with your coach, But if you have an accountability partner or you're part of a group where there's some element of accountability, like that's hugely helpful. Because I'll tell you, not everyone loves the process of learning about audio, how to edit audio, record audio, set up audio channels, change microphones, like all of that. It's not something you're like, hey guys, guess what I get to do today? Sit down and crunch numbers. Woo!
Right.
So when you have built-in accountability, it's like at least you get this like, did you do it? Yeah, I did it. Did you do it? Yes. And then I drank 4 cocktails, like you find a way to get through some of the more challenging parts.
So this brings up another question, and I don't know if it was one of the other steps, so forgive me, but the technical component, right? I think people think where they're like, hey, I'm just going to create raw audio and send it to someone, and not only will the clouds part and the divine light will say, you're the voice I've been waiting for, but that they'll do all the work in terms of editing it. And, there's so much that you can do now in the home. Is your home office expected to be where most of the editing will go on?
So there are so many different paths and types of career within the voiceover industry. I will tell you, I have friends and colleagues who, outside of their auditions, this is the one thing, no matter what kind of work you end up doing, you will be editing your own auditions. So you do need to know something about it. But in terms of editing the final product, there are people who only do sessions with a production house where there is a studio engineer who will want nothing but raw audio. Even so, the signal garbage in, garbage out, clear signal in, clear signal out. Even if you're working with an editor, I have one, or you're working with a studio engineer, you still have to understand audio well enough that you can give them a clean, clear signal that they can edit, master, and produce. So there's no escaping it, but you can escape it to different degrees or lean into it. For example, I have all of my long form narration, so e-learning. I don't do audiobooks, but if I did, audiobooks, anything that's longer than, let's say, 3 or 4 minutes, I have an editor who edits and masters that for me. But then all of my short form, so auditions, commercials, telephone jobs, intros and outros on podcasts, kiosks, whatever, I edit that myself.
How viable is it for somebody to find jobs through like Fiverr or some of those things? Is that a good way to put your toe in the water?
Well, that's where we kind of got to on step 4 is the next piece after you're in the right dream, you're in the right place, you've got great performance, you've learned about tech, you've got equipment, you're kind of ready to produce. The next piece is finding those people who need it. One of the reasons why the industry has changed so much is because we now live in this kind of gig economy where people can, if you're a freelancer, there are sites like Fiverr, there are sites like Upwork. I actually did a voiceover for a new one that just started up that I can't remember the name of. Like there's a lot of freelance platforms out there where you can launch and say, here's my voiceover service. Audible, Amazon, when they launched Audible, they put up this great site called ACX that started directly connecting audiobook authors and publishers and rights holders to narrators. So, instead of having to go through a casting director or giant publishing house, actors and performers were able to meet with smaller to medium-sized level authors and publishers. So that's changed a lot. And then there's also a category for voiceover that's voiceover specific, because things like Upwork, Fiverr, and some of the other freelance platforms, they're not voiceover specific. They're for any type of freelance work. The ones that are voiceover specific are generally what we call pay to play. So you pay a membership fee, you get in there, you create a profile, you put up your samples, and then clients will come and they either do giant casting calls where they ask for, a believable 45 to 35-year-old next door neighbor with a golden voice who has some authority, but is very conversational and, yada, 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 yada. And then they'll just get a bunch of auditions and select their talent that way. Or they'll go through, say the top 100 listed voice actors on the website and invite people to audition that way, or just reach out and hire you directly from a demo or a sample you have posted. So there are a lot of options, in other words. A very long way of saying, Doug, there are a lot of options.
You talk like I do. I tell you how to build the clock when you ask what time it is. So you mentioned agents, right? You mentioned that's a good way to move forward. One, I'm guessing from the feedback that you'll get, and because they want to make money, but When the right to say, hey, maybe it's best that I get an agent? And is that based on how long you've been doing it or what resources you have at your disposal?
I think it's a little bit of both. And I think this is the kind of question, if you had brought on a panel of 10 voice actors or coaches and you asked that question, you might get 12 different answers. Like, not even kidding. When I've asked my agent this question, I asked him to speak to a group of people I coached. It can take some time to get an agent. So really the best strategy is if you think you might be ready, like you have some skills that would be marketable and you've got your equipment and you're reliable and you know how it works. It's probably a good time to start, because you're going to reach out, you're going to, have a cover letter, you're going to give your demo, you're going to explain kind of who you are and why they should partner with you. And it may be at that time they don't really have room for your voice on their roster. Maybe they already have 3 people who sound like you, and those people have been there for a while. But then let's say one of those 3 people decides to like leave the business or goes to have a baby or, moves to Fiji or whatever. Now there's a spot open. So it's not like it's a one and done. They say no and you're done. You kind of keep submitting every 6 months, a year, anytime you upgrade your equipment, anytime you upgrade your demo. It's kind of a long conversation of networking and wooing that can happen. So I do think getting in there early. I think what's really important, though, when you do that, is to be really respectful, right? It's like approaching it like you're looking for a business partner, not like you're at a speed dating event.
Right.
So, like, knowing each agency usually has very specific instructions about how they want to be contacted and really following those instructions specifically.
Now, do you as a coach help them engage with agents or agencies?
In terms of like giving advice or best practices, yes, but in terms of actual making introductions, no. And I'll tell you, it's because I want folks who can get out there and show some energy and innovation and determination, and who aren't going to rely on somebody to do things for them, right? And that's what I want. When I get coached, I don't want a coach who just hands me fish. I want a coach who's like, here's how we fish better, or here's how you fish for that particular type or whatever.
Now, I know you and I have talked, like you've got that, you're in an apartment downtown, so you've got some limited space.
What, this spacious palace? Come on, man.
I was going to say, though, like me, I was lucky enough to move into a house that had sort of a room that I've repurposed sort of as a studio-esque kind of setup. What, did you like walk around with a decibel meter to see like where can you make it the most quiet for all of that? Like, what type of prep did you need to do to create where you do it? And when people do demos, can they go somewhere to do it first? And is that a good recommendation?
I love, these are all wonderful questions, and I'm glad you asked them. When I first started, I just always went into a closet. I mean, the most ideal thing you have is a space that's not made out of like metal or something super reverberant. That's an internal room with a door that can close. So if you have a walk-in closet, that is the best place to start for a home studio. After moving into some apartments where that became a challenge because the closet wasn't separate or wasn't large enough for the stuff, then yes, then I started, there's like apps you can put on your phone where you can listen. There are some things like fuse boxes, electrical outlets, things like that can create noise that maybe you weren't expecting to be in a quiet room. So it's good to know about those. But really, you want to be as far away from your refrigerator as possible. These are things I've learned. Like this is like literal like problems I've had. You want to be as far away from your refrigerator as possible. And you don't want unexpected sound from directly above where you are, which in the city, living downtown, can be very, very challenging because you can do a lot to sound isolate, but direct vibration on the ceiling above your microphone is a place that is like really, you have to do construction. There's no blocking that sound. And then the next question was, what was the next question after space?
Well, do you recommend going to like a professional, like getting studio time to really get that perfect audition tape or the
this is an answer that's changed. So it used to be, yes, I would recommend that somebody go to a studio and have, you've got your coach directing you, or the studio engineer might direct you to it. It doesn't really matter who's doing the direction, but you are just the voice actor. They worry about the audio. You worry about your performance, and someone else is directing you, so you really can only wear one hat. However, now, especially after the pandemic, we get more bang for our buck if we can also say that our demo showcases the quality of our home studio versus being like, well, I've got this demo of what I sound like when I go to a, $500,000 production house. And then but then now listen to these samples of what I can produce from home. So the other reason I really love when people record directly from home, doing like maybe a remote session with a studio, is that now you also have experience in doing remote sessions and what they're like. Because that's a lot of what voiceover, like if this is your full-time career, it's a lot of what we do. So rather than going in and seeing people, which happened a lot more before the pandemic and now it doesn't, if you do a remote session through IPDTL or Source Connect, then you also get some like real life experience in what later sessions will feel like. So I don't think it matters really where you do the demo, but I do think you get some added perks and benefits if you do them from your home studio.
Totally makes sense. So before we go too far, what's the biggest mistake? What would you say people need to avoid? And I don't know if we got a full 5 steps, but it really was it really did cover what we're looking for. But I don't want to miss out on the biggest mistake because my guess is it would be hard to pick just one.
It is, and we've already covered the one that I think creates the most problems, and it is it's the reason why you're doing it and not being connected to one that's going to serve you for the long haul. Because this is a long haul career. This is not I show up and tomorrow, these overnight success stories that you see on Facebook or other things, they're not overnight. That person did not post all 200 of their, nixed auditions. So I really think that's the main one. But I would say, mistake 1B that's kind of an offshoot from it is when people give up too early, right? They don't understand that you can learn new skills and there are different things you can try and you can get vastly different results by shifting like one tiny piece. I know people who, and I was one of them, I gave up for a year. I quit auditioning for a year because I got so in my head about it. But there's like tiny things like changing the way you word your proposal and then boom, your booking ratio completely changes. So for me, that's the most heartbreaking mistake. But the biggest mistake, I think, is the mental attitude piece.
And does it make sense to, assuming that you can, right? Like you were already performing, your career was performative, so it was an easy transition. For somebody else who maybe hasn't been working and, works within the home, takes care of kids, whatever, or somebody who has a job that affords them some time to do this, is it viable to really start it part-time and kind of ease into it? Because I think, we've had different shows on different things, and sometimes it's like, if you want to be successful, you have to just kind of like throw caution in the wind and jump in. And this seems like something very tailor-made if you have the patience and to some degree the resources. And before we finish, I do want to ask, what should someone expect to spend to get decent equipment? Because you go on Amazon and there's a literal shit ton of equipment out there, some of it good, some of it garbage, right? And some of it just good value, right? Like, hey, this will get you through your first couple of years. What should they expect to spend, and where's the best place to find it? Is it used? Is it, what's the best way to go?
Well, I'd say that's mistake 3C. A lot of people waste a lot of time wondering about best. I mean, if I had $1 for every time someone's asked me what the best microphone is for voiceover, I would be doing voiceover for fun instead of for money. What I can tell you from my experience, and I think a lot of people would agree. You look at the return on investment and you look what you currently have. I started my voiceover business on a $50 microphone. And then when I had booked my first agency industrial, actually for a HEPA filtered fan, the T300, Allen T300, I think it was, I took the money that I made from that industrial and I invested in a $100 microphone.
Wow, there you go.
Now, the interface I had at the time was also, I think, so that's the other piece. Like, there are basically two different sets of equipment. One is USB that plugs directly into a computer. I do not recommend those for the long haul on voiceover. For auditions, for working with your coach, great. But if you're going to be producing any high-level audio, you want a condenser mic that also requires an interface. And I wish I'd thought to bring one out. I could point it to you. But I think any $300 or less, you can find some great quality starter bundles for voiceover. They're not going to last you forever, but they're definitely enough for you to do auditions, to do practice homework with your coach. If you want to start earning while you learn and start up a freelance gig on one of those sites we talked about, and offer telephone services or something, and then you can use the money that you get from that channel and then upgrade. I now need interfaces and equipment to do so much more than in the beginning, and so that's really when I'm upgrading equipment, that's what I'm thinking of. Does the equipment I have right now limit what I can do, and do I want to do more? And then I purchase equipment that lets me do the new thing.
What about software? That's the other big thing.
So the free editing software that most people start out on is one called Audacity. It has everything that you need to do basic audio editing. Really, the only drawback to Audacity is that the processes it does aren't as efficient or automatic, or I love using the word sexy, so I'll say as sexy as some of the other software that you can get. There are also software programs like Twisted Wave, which is only for Mac, Reaper, Studio One that you pay a one-time license for, so that'd be a little bit more expensive than Audacity, but come with a lot more bells and whistles. And then I use Adobe Audition, which is a monthly cloud subscription through Adobe. For me, it makes sense. It pays for itself very easily, and I use some of their other Creative Suite programs. But you can start on Audacity easily. The only one that I recommend people don't use, unless you just have to, is GarageBand, because it doesn't have all the elements you need for editing voiceover specific audio.
Got it. Well, this time flew, and if people want to get a hold of you, and I know they do because we saw in the comment section, best way to get a hold of you. Remember, we do have it in the banner below, but this is also going to go all audio. So what's a good email, website, phone number? What's the best way and your preferred way?
Yeah. So again, folks, my name is Lauren Goode, and Goode has an E on the end, because English is fun. So it's www.goodevoice.com, www.goodevoice.com. And then my email address that's associated with that website is L, like as in Lauren, N as in Nicole, Goode, like my last name, @goodevoice.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. This has been, I don't remember a show recently where it's like, holy crap, the show's done. We've got some great guests, but fantastic show. Thank you so much. Again, for those of you who are listening, thank you so much. Again, this is Getting Started.Life on the WGSN Going Solo Network. And we talk every other week about new endeavors, 5 steps to start it, and the 1 mistake. If there's something you want to know about, we do have a lot of shows booked out, but let us know. We'll find the expert. We know great people like Lauren who can come in and tell you the best way to get started. If there's something you want to talk about, let us know. May or may not be a good fit for the show, but I think we think about everything. And again, thanks for listening. Again, this has been Getting Started.Life on the WGSN Going Solo Network. Today's show was brought to you by Keystone Mediation and Red Light Funding. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you in 2 weeks.